let's draw truth tables, or let's see how different values of Boolean conditions affect the results of expressions. And let's start with the simplest one, not. So let's say we have a variable x, and it can be whether true or false. X can actually be expression itself. For example, x is whether temperature is above something. But let's say it holds a value whether true or false. And now, if we want to see what is the value of not x, then it's basically the opposite value of the original value. So if it's a true, in the beginning it will become false, and if it's false, then it becomes true. Basically, it's as you would say, if it's true, if it's not true, then it's false. If it's false, if it's not false, then it's true. Okay, let's go on. Then we have and. And here we want to use two variables, x and y. And let's see what happens if they are both false. If the first one is false, the other is true. The first is true, the other is false, and both are true. And let's see what happens if we say x and y. So with the and expression, the result is true only if the both values are true. So if the both are false, then the result is false. If either one is false, then it's false, and it's only true if both x and y are true. The second, or the other expression we can see here is or, x or y. And this condition is true if at least one of those is true. But if they're both false, then the result is false. But here, whether we can say if x or y, then because y is true, the result is true. If x or y, because the x is true, then the result is also true. And if they are both true, then the result is also true. And this is something maybe in the beginning you want to look up from the table, but in the end it's basically logical way to kind of evaluate Boolean logic. So if you use them a lot, you will become familiar with this table. And then you can combine all those different kind of expressions. For example, we can say, let's say x and y, or x. Let's have additional value here. Then it's more interesting. Let's say it has also, but with the free values, I will have bigger table here, false, and now every set is true, and false, 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 true, true, false, and true, true. Those are basically the same because they don't matter from the third variable. But here we can see what happens. So first, there are different ways to kind of calculate it. If you know the logical expressions more, then maybe you can kind of simplify different expressions, but let's just see how it can be calculated here. So first we do the x and y part. X and y is written basically here, so it's basically false, 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 true, and here basically it's the same because x and y values are the same as above. So basically it's false, 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 and true. Okay, and now we have to calculate false or z. So because the z value is false everywhere here, the only way, so we can do it line by line. We take this result, which is false, and false or false is false. So here we also have false, and we have false here, and we also have false here and false here. And now we have true or false, then we say it's true. And here, because the set value is always true, it's the way I wrote this table. I could write it in a different order, then it might not be the same. But basically, because we take false or true, we always get true. So that's the result here. So as you can see, you can combine different expressions to get more complex expressions. And usually in code, you might not want to write it too complicated, or you don't want to use too complicated conditions, because it's harder to read and it's harder to debug or find problems in your code. So it's recommended to use simpler conditions and maybe combine them in different statements, but in certain cases you don't have any other options than to just write those complex conditions. And here is an example where we have conditional with expression. So if the temperature is above 18 and it's not raining, because I don't want to mow the lawn if it's raining. And we use else if here, so it's one if statement with three different branches. So the first branch is whether the temperature is above 18 and it's not raining. Then if the temperature is above 18 and it is raining. Then we say it's warm but it's raining, we just, I don't know, do nothing. And if the temperature is less than 18, then we say it's cold. And the else part, we could have if condition there also. The else if parts, we can have several else if parts. So basically we have one if part, then we can have different or several else if parts, and then we can have else part. We always have to have one if part. We can have 0 or more else if parts, and we can have 0 or 1 else part. And the order is always the same. The first one is if, then we can have else if parts, and then we can have else part. So if statement can be used to conditionally execute some parts of the code. So depending on whether we want to do something if the milk has ended, or whether the temperature is above certain degrees and so on, then we can use if statement to execute some parts of the code, only if the condition is true. If statement or the if block in general can have different branches. And as I wrote here, the branches are if, then else if parts, and then else part. And as pointed out, we always have to have one if part. If there is no if, then it's not an if statement. Then we can have 0 or more else if or else if parts, and we can have 0 or 1 else part. But because there can be 0, we can have only if, then we can have if and else, then we can have if, if, let's have one more if and else, and we can also have if and else if without else part. So there are different ways to combine those statement blocks. Also, this if you consider this as one if statement, then you can have different or multiple if statements in your code. So you can have let's say there's a if statement, something is done here. Now you can have another if statement here, and also some code is executed here. Those are different if statements. So let's say there we have else part, and now I can still have if statement here. So this one is one if statement, this one is another, and this one is third one. And if we say that only one branch can be executed inside one if statement, so here we can execute, for example, this statement block or this branch. Here, for example, we can execute this else part because this condition was not true, but this is a different statement. So it doesn't matter whether I executed some branches from the previous statement or not. We look this statement separately. So one branch in every statement can be executed. And also if we reach here, it doesn't matter whether there was something executed or not. We just see that, yeah, okay, this condition is true. We execute this part, for example. And also what can happen is that none of those branches is executed. So for example, we have if statement here, if the temperature is above, I don't know, 30 degrees, because it's not, then we just ignore this branch and we don't execute any of those branches inside this if statement. So, but maximum is 1. So we can execute only one branch, but we can also execute 0. And the branch executions can be controlled by the conditions. And conditions are basically true or false. But we can also combine different smaller or simpler conditions to combine more complex conditions. And this way you can basically control everything you want in your code.